You would be cheered to know that hemp as a plant grown for fibre has history on its side.
That's Oxford University professor Lynda Mugglestone. This is the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. Hi there, my name is Eric Herlock. Welcome back to the Hemp Show. So lately on the podcast, I have been wrestling with this question of what the word hemp really means, where that meaning comes from, how it's shifted over time, and who gets to define it today. It's a question that keeps coming up as the hemp industry itself tries to sort out its own identity. Today, we're going deep into the history of the word hemp, where it came from, how it's changed, and what's at stake as the word gets pulled in different directions here in the 21st century. Professor Mugglestone is a historian of the English language, a lexicographer, and an expert in how words evolve and collide with law, commerce, and culture. And today she is helping me trace the long, complicated story of hemp, a very old English word that's caught up in a very modern debate. All that and more right after these messages. This episode is brought to you in part by I&D Hemp in Fort Benton, Montana, where they believe in the goodness of hemp. I&D Hemp is a family-owned, mission-driven industrial hemp food, feed, and fiber company that's providing new opportunities for American farmers. Learn more at indhemp.com. This episode is also made possible with support from Forever Green, distributors of the KP4 hemp cutter. Introducing a revolution in hemp harvesting, setting a new standard for harvesting quality, speed, and efficiency, the KP4 prepares hemp for ideal retting and easy on-field tedding, raking, and baling. It's easy to maintain and designed to withstand the punishments of hemp harvesting. The KP4 hemp cutter, available only at hempcutter.com. The show is also brought to you with support from the National Hemp Association. If you're in the fiber and grain hemp space, you should know about the National Hemp Association. Industrial hemp is rooted in farms and built for industry, and NHA is working to build supply chains, support rural development, and push for the policy changes that fiber and grain producers need. Learn more and get involved at nationalhempassociation.org. Okay, welcome back. So here we are. It's the last week of June 2025. It's officially summertime, and I'm officially ready for a vacation. And who knows, by the time you're hearing this, maybe I'm relaxing on a beach somewhere. I hope so. Anyway, I'm excited to share this interview with you. You know that I've been on this somewhat quixotic quest to understand the true meaning of the word hemp and how that meaning has expanded over time, and if there's anything we can do to stop this semantic shift. Here's the thing. I'm sort of a word nerd. I was an English major in college. I love to read. I love to write. I love words, their histories, their sounds, and stories. I have been captivated with the history of the English language ever since taking Dr. George Monroe's History of the English Language class at Kutztown University, spring semester 95. So this interview today makes my brain light up, making those synapses fire, rewiring my brain just a bit, and I love it. And I'm so grateful to Professor Mugglestone for being so prepared to talk about the history of the word hemp. I learned a lot, and I suspect you will too. Here we go. Today on the podcast, I am joined by Professor Lynda Mugglestone, a distinguished historian of the English language and a professor at the University of Oxford, where her work focuses on how words take root, evolve, and sometimes go to seed. She's the author of several books, including Lost for Words, The Hidden History of the Oxford English Dictionary, Samuel Johnson and the Journey into Words, and Writing a War of Words, Andrew Clark and the Search for Meaning in World War I. Professor Mugglestone is widely recognized for her research into linguistic change, lexicography, and the politics of meaning. I've asked her to help me understand the history of the word hemp and to help me make sense of this linguistic journey/battle over the meaning of the word hemp that I've embarked on the show lately. Professor Mugglestone, welcome to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. It is an honor to have you here. Thank you for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm great, thank you. And thank you very much for inviting me. This is a real experience.
Well, yeah, likewise. So could you give us a very brief introduction, a little context before we jump into the word hemp?
Sure. Well, I've always been fascinated by language. I grew up on a farm, in fact, and grew up speaking a dialect of Northeast Derbyshire. And when I went to school, I was told, well, you can't use those words because they're not words. And thereby began a long battle to work out, okay, so what is a word? What's a good word? What's a bad word? Why? So I was an early linguistic troublemaker, I think, actually. And so I've always been fascinated by people's opinions about words, how they change, why they're changing. And that's the story, really.
Right. Well, I'm really glad I found you because I think we're about to embark on a fun conversation. So on the show, in the past few weeks, few months even, I've been sort of struggling with the meaning of the word hemp. I've covered the hemp industry here in the U.S. since 2018. So about 7 years. And lately in the U.S., it's like the industry wants to split into two different things. It wants to sort of go to things that can be farmed, like big farming, fiber and grain. And then there's this sort of horticultural side of it, which is cannabinoids. And sort of that side of the industry looks and feels a lot like, marijuana, THC, et cetera. So the battle I'm sort of waging is, shouldn't hemp just mean what it has always meant? Right? And what has it always meant? And that's my question. So, Professor Mugglestone, what do we know about the earliest uses of the word hemp in the English language?
Okay, well, you would be cheered to know that hemp as a plant grown for fibre has history on its side. So if we go right back to Old English, we can see the very earliest kind of herbals and leech books talking about hemp, glossed as cannabis because that's its Latinate genus type, but actually referring only to a plant that was widely grown in Britain. So we can see evidence in Old English, where it's spelt, it's often got two syllables at that point. It's either hennep or hennep or something like that. And gradually, because it's so common, it's just loses its extra syllable and becomes hamp or hemp. And then it stays pretty constant, actually, as hemp, meaning this amazing crop. It's, so you can think about it as a crop, but it also gains these connotations in its early use of strength, endurance. It's got a lot of really positive attributes that are very well established. Gets early literary use. We can find it in a romance in around 1300, possibly a little bit before, in the Romance of Havelock, where he needs to make some nets. And what does he use for his fishing nets? He gets some hemp, you see. So it's out there, used for a crop and used to make useful things with it. And that's the kind of the key story that we can see being established in Anglo-Saxon England and in Middle English as well, particularly then like with the nets associated with rope, kind of in good, useful products that can be used in shipping, in boats, etc., etc.
Right, so, sails and clothing and all sorts of things that we need as people.
Absolutely. It was incredibly useful. And I think that's the kind of thing that comes across. It's early placed in books on husbandry, or actual early books on farming always have a section on hemp, you see. So you'd be very cheered to know that it's got a very well established history with these early books on husbandry telling you when you should grow it. So apparently it's good. But then it was thought to be good to sow it in March and April. And also a good profit. They thought it was a good economic kind of thing as well. Because obviously, era of sail, you can use it in your ship's rigging. You can use it to make the sails themselves because it's about industrial cloth, not fine fabric, but really coarse linen, says Samuel Johnson, the great lexicographer. You use it for tough fibre, coarse linen, So it's robust. So there's lots and lots of very positive comments about why you really need to grow some hemp.
Okay. So you mentioned that sort of in earlier English, it was hennep, and that I think there's an Indo-European root kenep, which sort of you can see cannabis comes from that. But how did it get from kenep to hennep to hemp? And I don't know, is it worth going into sort of a quick primer on
Sure.
how English developed in Britain from the Celts to the Romans?
Philology and farming have, very close roots, obviously.
Okay.
I mean, yes, so what we can see in the very early history of hemp as a word is that it's widely used in common Germanic. So English is a Germanic variety. We're West Germanic. But if we look across the other varieties of Germanic, then we see very similar words. Hemp, often hemp or hamf or something like that. But actually what you can do if you stand back a little bit is you can see there's a pattern to the kind of changes. So in Germanic, we've got this hamp form, but if we go a little bit further back, and range a little bit further afield, then we can see these K forms being introduced as well. But they're what we term cognates. They're part of the same family. They're the same word, but they look slightly different. And so there was some enterprising philologists in the 19th century who started to try and think, well, how can we explain these changes? And so this is where we get the joys of things like Grimm's law and Werner's law, because actually rather than being random patterns between different languages in the same family, they're actually pattern changes. So as a process of deduction, if you have a K in Latin, it often changes then to an H in English or in any Germanic variety. So there's a very patterned set of changes. If you've got a particular type of sound in one language, it will often mutate to another type of sound quite regularly in another language. It didn't always work. So then another enterprising chap called Mr. Werner had to come in and say, well, hang on, no, we need some extra laws. But what we're interested in here is just Grimm's law, which explains that K's become H's, and that explains why cannabis and hemp are the same thing. So linked by these family roots, actually, but just looking slightly different.
Yeah, well, that takes me back to my history of the English language class with Dr. George Monroe in, 1995, learning about Grimm's Law. And they're the same Grimms that jotted down the fairy tales, right?
Yeah,
sort
but
of
less
as a side note.
Yeah, I mean, the fairy tales are quite grim in various other ways, actually, whereas this is, empirical truth. This is evidence that we can actually see these changes taking place. And then once it gets to England, across a variety of dialects, because we don't have a single English language. We just got 4 interrelated dialects with many cross-fertilizations between them. It's disyllabic, as I said, so it's hanep or something, variations of that. But once you drop the unstressed syllable, which you do in rapid speech, then it's really difficult to have a n and a p together. So what we do in English is use anticipatory articulation. I hope you like that as a bit of jargon. So we're always building up to the next sound. So instead of saying hamp, we start saying hamp. And it's interesting at that point because the spelling's still fluid, obviously, for quite a long time. So in fact, the spelling follows the sound. So we get spell it, hemp or hamp, or as it's become hemp.
Hemp.
Yeah.
Hemp. All right. And so it was a really common word in early English, right? How about during the Middle Ages? Was it a household word? People talked about hemp.
In fact, you can see it's quite common, particularly because it hasn't changed that much. So if we think back to Anglo-Saxon times, you've got some words that change an awful lot. So, for example, the Old English word silly, or the equivalent, actually meant blessed then, and now means silly. So it's changed an awful lot. But lots of core words that were really fundamental to life, stay the same. Words like house and ship and fish. Hemp is one of those. That's really interesting, actually. There's this little core of words that stay very, very stable across time in their form and actually for a really long time in their meaning as well. So we can recognize the concept house in Old English, Middle English, early modern, through to today. And it was the same for hemp, actually. So it's one of those words, like book is another one, where we've got exactly the same form coming from Common Germanic into English and then going through the centuries with this very well-established set of meanings, that it was a crop, that it was incredibly useful, it was bound into really key areas of the economy and agriculture. These early herbals and manuals on husbandry also stressed you could grow it anywhere. So that was a really useful thing as well. Yeah. It was a very versatile crop. So again, for areas of the country that weren't very rich, then anyone could grow it. It didn't need elaborate cultivation. It didn't need lots of water, again, because, if you think about the how we grow things in that period as well, there's something that was easy to grow, fast to grow, not demanding in terms of like human industry to look after it. This was great. So it is just routinely commended and is a core part of all these manuals on plants or how to look after your farm in the Renaissance.
Right.
We have our little sections on hemp, when to plant it, how to grow it, and how to make a profit from it.
Yeah. And you've got a collection of those books over there at Oxford? Is that what you're telling me?
We have. Well, we've got pretty much all books in the Bodleian. Yeah, from an early stage, actually, we had we had a deposition rule, so that anytime anything was printed, it gets popped into the Bodleian. So we have an unrivaled collection of books on just about everything, actually. So and dictionaries as well. As hemp is in all the early dictionaries, talking being defined as this fibre. Fibrousness comes out really, really early, and its use in particularly, shipping and, coarse rope making as well. That does bring, of course, some rather less savoury aspects of its history.
I was actually just about to ask about that, but yeah, go ahead, keep going.
Yeah. Well, we have to kind of touch on this because one of the celebrated properties of hemp, and not only was its strength and endurance in general, but that it made really, really good ropes, which is great if you're doing your shipping and you're making your fishing nets like Havelock and in the poem. But actually, it also got a starring role in capital punishment, unfortunately. So, it generated lots of new idioms. Would you like to taste hemp, for example, or be hanged at the gallows? If we translate this, so they're kind of both euphemistic and dysphemistic. They're both kind of concealing. You're not saying, well, you're going to be hanged tomorrow. Would you like to taste hemp? But then it's getting hemp there, because its strength. Once you have tasted hemp, you're not going to escape from this, for example.
Do you have more hemp and
yes,
idioms?
you could do hemp seed. That would also lead to the same conclusion, So, doing your hemp seed would not be a good thing to do because, or you could be, someone who was referred to as a stretch hemp, so that scoundrel, he's a likely stretch hemp, i.e. he's going to end up on the gallows.
I think I've met some stretch hemps in the hemp industry already.
Well, you never know. You'll be able to look out for them now. So these usages were very common in Renaissance England, as far as we can see. Lots of jargon for murder, for villainy and things like, which were collected up by cant lexicographers, because the first dictionaries of English were in fact about slang and jargon. So the jargon of hemp actually has an unexpected direction. But all of these have become obsolescent. So this is kind of like a side shoot in the history of hemp, where it wanders off into crime and punishment into the Renaissance. And also there's another bit that if you escaped being hung at the gallows with your hemp, then you would then be sent to prison, and one of your tasks might be then treading hemp. So you got hemp one way or another, really. You couldn't escape from hemp, really. It was ubiquitous. So the prison forces could be used as a way of, industrial manufacture. That'll serve you right for being naughty. You're either, going to be a stretch hemp and that you're out of the running, or you're going to be helping, actually, with the hemp,
Yeah. There's a lot there. So thinking about that room where you have all of the books, I think I need to schedule a road trip. I need to go back to England and do a hemp tour of England. So
absolutely. Well, apparently some of the paper is made of hemp as well. I mean, hemp really gets everywhere. So you could, find a book that's talking about hemp made of hemp.
Yeah.
It can get intriguingly meta, Can we get away from hemp, In
the past 7 years, I have not been able to get away from hemp.
You probably wouldn't want to. No, but apparently, I know. I mean, I have read, but I haven't tested this, that the Gutenberg Bible was printed on hemp paper, again, because it's very strong and very enduring. So you might well want to print words that you want to last on your hemp.
Yeah, I've seen the Gutenberg Bible, or one edition of it at Harvard University a couple of years ago.
And was it made of hemp?
I didn't ask. They didn't let me touch it. And maybe there was a plaque and I should have read, but I'll have to check.
You need to go back. Yeah, you need to go back.
All right. So dictionaries. You're a fan of dictionaries.
I am.
I am too, but maybe not as much of a fan as you are.
Yeah, I'm interested in how they get made and what gets into them and what doesn't get into them as well, So not only, what they're made of, but also these difficult decisions. How do you define a word, And also the pragmatics of dictionaries, because obviously up until in fact, including the Oxford English Dictionary, the first drafts of all of these were written by hand, So there's very interesting. And then you've got to try and turn them into print. And print is much more rigid in saying, well, you can't have that many words or you can't have that many examples. Which ones are you going to get rid of? So there's an interesting tension all the time between
politics. Right?
Yeah, the politics of representation, what gets into a dictionary and why.
It's fascinating. All right. So how did hemp appear in early dictionaries like Samuel Johnson's or the OED? Did its definition reflect its industrial, agricultural use or something else? Did it ever have anything to do with medicine or drugs or, psychoactive qualities?
Yeah. You are going to start seeing this creep in the OED. So Samuel Johnson one just talks about it as a tough fibre and that it's used for coarse linen and, in sort of manufacture, really. And the distinctive thing about both Johnson's dictionary and the Oxford English Dictionary is they base their entries on quotations. So rather than sitting there in your armchair thinking, I know what this word means, I'll call it this, they go the other way around. They go out and they find lots of evidence for how a word is used. So Johnson gives lots of quotations from other works, often works on husbandry, which all talk about how useful hemp is, actually. So there's a very famous manual of husbandry by Mortimer, published in 1707. And he says, though, you really need, it's a good commodity, he says, and you need to encourage people to grow it because it's just so many uses and it's a good profit, So it's quite a nice pithy section that Johnson quotes in his entry, showing that hemp is not just a word, but it's a commodity. It's really useful, and it establishes all the kind of core meanings. So with the OED, that does a kind of slightly different things. It quotes. It wants to tell a life history of the whole word, which is kind of ambitious. So it goes back to like the earliest Old English quotes, and it's sort of sitting there saying, right, okay, what's it meaning now? So again, in the Victorian OED, we've got the idea that it's a fibre, it's a crop, all those things. But we start towards the end of the 18th century to suddenly get a new sense of it creeping in, where in a history of Sumatra, then we get a sudden use of hemp, where they're saying, hemp, interesting. They're not using hemp for making ropes here. They're smoking it. And there's your beginning, actually, of this new sense of hemp, where, in fact, it's being used to refer to its psychoactive properties rather than its strength in more physical ways. So that's our first little nugget that it's changed. Otherwise, you do have references in the herbals that you can use its seeds as a sedative or something like this, or it has medicinal uses. But medicine is pretty unregulated in Georgian England, so you never know. So
it's like when they saw the Sumatra hemp, they just didn't have a different word for it. They recognized it as the same plant, but like,
yes.
Whoa, completely different, probably growing style and definitely different uses.
Absolutely. This is the first evidence that I've seen, looking at the OED data files as well, where you've got the recognition that this is the same plant or plant species. But what they've done, and this is a classic of how language changes, of course, is they've used the word they know and compared it to the functions they know for the word they know. So hemp, use it to make ropes, but then said, it's hemp, inverted commas, but they're using it for something completely different. They're smoking it. So, and that wouldn't have, the concept wouldn't have been alien in that people were smoking opium. Even Samuel Johnson took opium as he was nearing his end. Opium was quite common in, 18th century
Recreational
Britain.
opium. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's just kind of very available,
Well, you like poppies over there in England, from what I understand.
Yeah, but not kind of smoking them. We like looking at them. We've got some in my garden. Yes. So here we have, if we just kind of like tease out that shift where we've got same word on the surface, but then being attached to a new role. And then by the Victorian period, this is really being consolidated, actually, where we're starting to see that overlap between cannabis as the genus type of the plant as a species and hemp as a particular type of application, and there's a kind of blurring semantically of the edges.
Right. I've seen like bottles from apothecaries, from the late 1800s, where it lists cannabis right on the ingredients list. It's got opium, It's got cannabis, it's got rye whiskey, and it cures everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, it's amazing what you can see advertised, actually. Lots of things that we think of as inherently dangerous or something that should only be used under great medical supervision can just be, promoted as a healing cure. Because, of course, until you've got stricter medical regulation, anyone can be a doctor, or claim. So quack medicine. I mean, this goes on even into the First World War. I mean, there's some stuff in the Clark book, which is very funny or intriguing, where radium, a word that didn't make it into the OED because they thought it was newfangled, it'll never catch on, but was advertised as, anything, feeling a bit nervous, have some radium, radium bread. Make your sandwiches today with radium bread.
We're talking radioactive things.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Right. You could buy it for your garden and put it on your plants. And it was promoted as an early cure for shell shock as well. You could have a radium bath.
Oh, wow.
You sort of pop some in like bath salts into your bath. So, and for hair loss, just in case anyone's listening. I don't think it worked, but,
It is amazing that the human race has survived.
It is. But yeah, this is the kind of challenge, really. So with early medical, quote, wellness applications, language was often used in highly flexible ways, and in ways that would now surprise us. So yes, it's not too difficult to find a little handy bottle of cannabis or opium. It's very easy to acquire, I understand, if you're in the 18th century. Yeah. So.
All right. So is there historical precedent for a word like hemp being stretched kind of drastically by legal or commercial forces? And maybe I should sort of set that up a bit because, here in the U.S. with the rise of CBD and this whole, the U.S. Farm Bill in 2018 created a legal definition of the word hemp, and chaos has ensued pretty much ever since. So is there historical precedence for words being sort of stretched by legal or commercial forces?
I think there's often attempts to control what a word means, either in a dictionary or by a particular legal constraint. The problem is that actually users carry on doing something slightly different, actually. And I think then you end up in a rather kind of blurred sense where there's a legal definition of something, but it might not hold for the way people are actually using the word. So that explains why you end up in this kind of, but you can see issues like the history of tea and a tea leaf. What is a legitimate tea? Because all sorts of things were being sold as tea early on, so sawdust, anything could be, or adulterated. What is tea? So there's some very interesting regulations about how do we know we're actually drinking tea or a bit of sawdust with a bit of few tea leaves kind of stirred into it, actually. So you can see it's beneficial trying to regulate. Okay, so is tea or is what's in tea, and so it's the same kind of thing, I guess, with hemp, when the attempt to impose clarity. But nevertheless, the problem is that the cross currents of meaning, usage, regulation can often not necessarily coincide, or people can just become very confused. Nevertheless, even with a bit of attempted regulation, actually, because other meanings for hemp are already out there. So, so in the UK, you've certainly got hemp as an industrial product with less than 0.3% of psychoactive. So it's just very regulated, and apparently everything has to be tested, and you have to have a license, etc. But it doesn't stop lots of other use of hemp appearing if you go to any wellness shop. You see, I'm using my hands as inverted commas on the video here, which you those listening can't see, but then you will see lots of product labeled hemp, which aren't in fact the same kind of thing. And it can vary across a whole range of levels of psychoactive components. So it becomes actually, you've got one level, you've got, legislation, and then you've actually got a whole range of other commercial usages which are pushing that definition.
Right. And that's kind of the problem I'm having right now because, I cover this industry and I see industrial hemp fiber and grain, fitting really well into existing large-scale farming systems, right? Corn and soy here in the US. But here's this plant that, like you said before, needs minimal water and it improves the soil and it's good for, the crop rotation. It pulls carbon out of the atmosphere. It's just here's this perfect crop at the right time. But there's this confusion about it where lawmakers and consumers, when they hear the word hemp, they think weed. And that kind of makes everything stop because you'd be surprised how far along this industry is, right? There's processing centers all over the world who are using this plant to make things that are going to change the world, like next paradigm, new paradigm sort of thing. And so, yeah, I've taken it upon myself to fight this fight. But
yeah, well, it is a kind of dream product, actually, particularly given current, environmental concerns, actually. I think it needs maybe a hard sell now on advertising real hemp,
Exactly. And that's
authentic hemp.
True
You need to get
the
authenticity. True hemp. Yeah, I think that's right. The kind of the history of it, this kind of authenticity through time. Because, of course, for a number of people, hemp with the other psychoactive associations, that is the problem. A word is not only its denotation, what it physically denotes, it's its connotations. And that's what you're struggling with because it's acquired all these other connotations, actually, which act as a kind of stigmatizing force for a body of users and make people kind of resist the idea of hemp, even though they're not thinking about it as a denotative, as something that is a functional crop. They're thinking, surely it's something else. And so that is one of the problems. It's polysemy. Language does it, so that words acquire multiple meanings. And through time, lots of people have thought, wouldn't it be nice if just was one word and it had one meaning? But it's just not the way it works.
Life is messier than that.
Yeah, it really is, actually.
So the stigma we talked about. So when hemp was, first sort of legalized in 2018 as a commodity crop, it was up against this marijuana stigma. And then as the CBD boom and bust happened here in the US, and I imagine over there in the UK, it now has a second stigma of the CBD part of it, where here in Lancaster County, that's where I'm based, and it's one of the farming meccas of the US. I'm sure you can picture people with straw hats here.
I'm picturing. That's it. We need furry hats today in Britain, actually.
Oh, it's
very
chilly.
cold.
Yeah, it's chilly here for June for us too. Or it was this morning anyway. So I'm kind of up against this double stigma where, as working for an agricultural newspaper and, I'm a dreamer, I want to imagine this future where things are better than the present. And now farmers have this stigma in their mind, I don't want to grow that because it's drugs, or now, everyone lost their money in CBD. And I'm just trying to keep no, everybody, keep your eyes on the prize. It's actually about the large scale growing of fiber and grain. And so hang in there with me. So I feel like I'm playing this waiting game, trying to defend this meaning just so the farmers of the future, and I don't mean the faraway future, I mean the close future, are going to have this crop. And it's happening. So I don't know.
Well, the meaning hasn't gone away. It's just been joined by others. And I think what they're doing now is a kind of tussling for supremacy, really, But because connotation is difficult, I think, really, because it's this web of association, actually. So once you're trying to kind of cut your way through this, it is quite hard to say, no, this is the clear-cut meaning on one side and these are other ones. And this is what dictionary makers are always trying to do. When is a meaning, it's called splitting. When do we split the meanings? What are our bases? But this is a prime case for where it's great to split these meanings out, actually, and, make clear that it's not a narcotic. So It's just pure and simple. It should be, as an industrial crop, and it has all these advantages, actually, which have been recognized through history, actually, but it's just been joined by these other meanings. So, it is this kind of web of language, which is the way, we get tangled in it and people get tangled in it and how things mean. And that's where we are.
For sure, yeah. I think part of it too, like the part of the hemp industry, like the cannabinoid side, the CBD side of things, they're making money like hand over fist. While the fiber and grain side, it's that industry is sort of slow to develop. So it seems like the people who are making a ton of money get to call the shots here. And it's like if they could maybe choose a different word and let the old meaning of hemp rise up.
That's not going to happen, though, really. This is going into like linguistic prescriptivism and linguistic control. And we know, that just doesn't work. So, Samuel Johnson quote of the day is that language is the work of man, of a being from whom permanence and stability cannot be expected. So it's, we might want it to be the same. He talks about how we might wish that words were like atoms, perfect, indivisible, as he thought they were at that point. But then he said, but they're wishes. That's not the way language is. Actually, language is a human product. And words, as he says, like their author, when they're not gaining strength, they're generally losing it, you see. So...
Wow.
Words are human products, actually. And so they grow, they shift and whatever. And so you're tangling with this innately human product of words. And so people are very unwilling to relinquish the word, obviously, that they're using. So, and CBD can be very low. I suppose that's the problem. CBD is a kind of very fuzzy product in its own right, because it can be very low psychoactive in terms of its, so it can quite align quite nicely with hemp.
Yeah.
Or it cannot. And that's part of the problem, actually. You've got a kind of continuum even on what CBD means.
Yeah, I think they should call it cannabis. They should use the word cannabinoids. They should call it maybe low
but
THC.
Nobody will buy it then, because they'll be seen as too naughty, you see. So then you're going to ruin their market and they're not going to be happy. You're on a kind of knife edge here, I feel,
But I'm in good company. Like people have been, having conversations about words like this for as long as there's been words.
Absolutely. People are always anxious about meanings, and of course, since language changes across a person's lifetime, people often feel nostalgia for all the way they feel a word or, a particular type of language once was. And it's very typical to see that change as kind of loss. Samuel Johnson said in 1755, that even as his diction was hastening to publication, which was a joke because it'd taken him 9 years and he's 6 years over contract. While his diction was hastening to publication, language was budding and falling away. Change was happening even as the diction was going to print,
Right.
And as a lexicographer, you just have to acknowledge that, really, So you're just watching, more agricultural metaphors here, budding and falling away, the crop of language.
So is writing a dictionary kind of like painting the Golden Gate Bridge? Like as soon as you're done, you have to start over? Because
Absolutely. Well, if you think about the OED is a kind of classic because it started doing A, it started printing A in 1884, and it didn't get to the end of the alphabet till 1928. So, there's no aeroplanes in A. You've had the whole of aerial warfare and the First World War, and there's nothing in there really. So, so they had to very quickly get going, really.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I bought this collection of encyclopedias. It was from, from the 30s, I guess. And as a kid, I was blown away. I'm like, look, World War II isn't in here, and World War I isn't even called World War I. It was mind-blowing.
And the Great War, that's right.
All right, so I get the sense that maybe I'm chasing windmills here with my one-man war against the semantic drift of the word hemp.
I feel this might be the case, really. But you're doing a valiant fight. And of course, there is a legitimate set of meanings behind this. So you just need to kind of maybe persist, really. It's not that you're trying to stop change entirely. That meaning is still there. So you're not trying to turn the clock back, but you're just trying to define where the limits of that meaning might be.
I like that.
So we could have a kind of more tolerant version of it, really.
Okay. Well, maybe I've sort of said this before, but my concern is that consumers and policymakers are missing the importance and potential of the hemp industry to address economic and environmental and like nutritional issues in our world today. Mostly because when they hear the word hemp, they think weed, not houses or textiles or superfood. So that wasn't really a question, I guess. That was just a comment here.
Yeah, you need some good advertising, maybe, to sort of really, really get that out there and just show visually just how many things that hemp really goes into, and get your Shakespeare quotes in there where Shakespeare's using hemp, and talking about hemp in Richard and Henry and things like this. And, just talk about this kind of, longevity. But I think it is the problem about trying to disassociate it from certain connotations, and I think for it's going to be tricky, so good luck.
Thanks. I think maybe hemp in Shakespeare would make a good episode.
Yeah, I think that would be good, actually. Yeah, it's always for the villains, though. I mean, is this the beginning of its kind of decline, Because they're always off to find some hemp, to kind of that's going to kill them as they get strung up because they're so bad. So maybe there's a sub-history here, that's the sort of, or we saw as an offshoot with Crime and Punishment was already setting hemp off onto the path of unrighteousness. I'm not sure. Yeah, well, I think it's an interesting one. Maybe not go there, but I think it does have a clear separation from drugs for most of its history, actually.
Yeah. In the UK, did they have the advertising campaign for the dairy industry years ago? It was like Got Milk.
Oh, got a lot of bottle. Yes.
Okay.
It's on. I've got a glass with it on still, actually. I think we should got it free from the milkman.
All right. So, yeah, the campaign here was Got Milk, and it was very successful. Everyone here remembers that. And I think of other...
hemp may be kind of like, it's just not going to work. And that shows how the meaning's changed, actually. If you have a T-shirt we should try it. Make a T-shirt and walk around Lancaster wearing Got Hemp.
Got Hemp? Yeah.
Yeah. And see what happens. You'll probably find you've got lots of new friends.
Yeah, follow me around. But I guess my point is, like, we need that level of, marketing campaign, like almost like the Think Different campaign of Apple computers in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, advertising is great at persuasion. I mean, that's the key role of advertising.
Yep.
And it plays with language all the time. So I don't see it as impossible. You just need to get it into the public mind, actually, So, I mean, you're right, because, I mean, maybe dairy needs to do the same kind of thing again. I don't know what it's like in the States, really, but soya milk and oat milk and whatever, as opposed to...
Taking some market share, for sure.
Yeah. So there's some interesting, there's always about, there's always a large market, though, for authenticity, for real history, for reality or whatever. So I think there's something you could do there.
Yeah.
But I do feel I would encourage you to get a T-shirt. I feel you should really walk around Lancaster with this T-shirt.
I will get back to you on that.
That could be a test of meaning. You could have a little questionnaire. What did you think when you saw my T-shirt? And then that might be a good test for, how many people think hemp means what?
Right. Okay, so this next question is not so much hemp related, but given your work and interest in folks like Samuel Johnson and Andrew Clark, who I gather spent a lot of time sort of squirreled away, surrounded by books and taking and making extensive notes about language, I see a theme here. So my question here is sort of more future focused. In this nascent age of AI that we find ourselves in, is there still a need for the longhand scribblers and documentarians and lexicographers? Or how will the historians that follow in your footsteps, how will they document the real world changes that our language, is undergoing right now? Is the internet enough of a record? Is there a danger of losing track of our history because of AI?
Well, that's a big question. It's a very interesting issue because a lot of the material I work with is script. So not only print, but also if you try to get behind dictionaries, you're often going on marginalia, little notes and margins, which are the most revealing things because there's where you see the human side of the decisions, actually. My current project on Johnson's dictionary is just showing that, in fact, rather than Johnson writing the thing all on his own, the great single-handed work, you can actually find a number of hands John's at work, by looking at the script and realizing that, in fact, his so-called copyists were, in fact, doing quite a lot more. So these kind of stories will be lost to us. And I think when I wrote my books on the Oxford English Dictionary as well, they were always about these paper records, because people wrote really quite abusive things in margins to each other, like, well, this word should not be in. We're going to lose all of that, and that's being lost already. If we edit a dictionary today, it's done digitally. So we're not going to have that track record, and we're not going to have the multiple print copies that there used to be. On the other hand, obviously a lot of stuff is still being printed. So, in terms of documenting language history, as long as you've got a provenance for a usage, so that is the real worry about AI. We need to know when and where a word was used. So if we're looking at data in the Oxford English Dictionary, we need to know this word was used in Computer Weekly in 2006 on page 21, because then someone can go in the future and look back at it. That's the problem with a web page, of course, or the internet. It might not be there. You might get a 404 and you're like, oh, my evidence has gone. And so, of course, you can assemble lots of internet language into corpora of usage, but it is going to be an interesting challenge, actually. But print missed a lot of language as well, actually, because, of course, most people's words don't end up in a book, or in a print text. So, increasingly we've looked at like printed letters, printed diaries of all sorts of people, but we've got to have a documentable source. Otherwise, you're just there's no proof that word was actually used. And it's about creating, aggregating all this little snippets of evidence about a particular word, and then say, that's how it meant. So we work from the evidence towards the word rather than thinking, oh, here's a word, and this is what I think it means. We need all the evidence. So I think AI, or particularly authorless text, for example, like an AI novel, so who really what is the author? It's going to raise some really interesting questions, and I guess, providing it's localizable and we can find it again, then it can be used as a record. And of course, documenting what AI does in terms of language is going to be interesting, actually, and also probably valuable. But we are already losing that immense personal archive of script, the letters, having Dickens letters or ordinary people's letters. I teach from a body of letters sent by a farmer's wife in the late 18th century for one of my courses, which is all very just mundane stuff, but it's incredibly revealing because she doesn't think her letters and her diaries are going to be the stuff of language history, but they are, you see. So increasingly it's voices, hidden voices, not the great and the good, where we feel they're really interesting to find out what real language was like. And we might be losing that, really, because who's got, ordinary diaries. There was a campaign in Britain recently to say, save your grandmother's diaries. If your mother or anyone has written a diary, don't let them throw them away. This is our history for the future,
So I've got crates of notebooks because I'm a writer. I've been just writing everything down for years. So I should hold on to those, is what you're saying.
You should, and bequeath them to some library who will go, oh, and then, but it would be really, really useful because, this is, evidence of how ordinary language was used, actually, because ordinary language is the most representative, not the fancy stuff performed by Dickens and Shakespeare. That's great too. But, the representative voice is always the most interesting.
A spectrum,
and then,
right?
Yeah, but then if we get AI as the representative voice, that's going to be a bit sad, really, because it's a kind of blandification, really. So she's inventing a word here. But it all sounds
That's how it works, right? Yeah, you just did it.
I know. Yeah. So we just need to get blandification out there. Lots of citations, please, people, for blandification.
I'll get you in the transcript and we'll get a record.
But you just get a very homogenous kind of, depersonalized voice. We can always tell when students are, plagiarizing or using AI because you just get this incredibly anodyne buzzing.
I can't imagine what it's like to be a professor at this point. And where you're up against that, how do you know? I guess, you look at it and you read it and you're like, oh, you didn't write that. But we spend a lot of time writing in blue books.
Yes, it's very interesting, actually. Maybe this will be the return to the pen, So It's the only way, ultimately, you can tell that someone has written what they've written,
Right,
actually.
right.
So, I mean, often you have a good hunch, but I'm sure, we all miss something. I think that, same in America as well. I think we've all got to rethink how we teach and how we assess to take this on board. But I guess people would have felt the same about like calculators, in the beginning, when you start introducing calculators into teaching and exams you can take it. And people are like, well, what? I mean, I used to remember all this maths, and do it in my
The
head.
slide
And isn't this
rules and everything,
cheating?
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it is one of those shifts. We've kind of coped before with, because I mean, lots of the more advanced calculators, like mini computers, really, which people have been using. But this is about simulating a voice or simulating data. The danger is, of course, it's often so wrong.
Right.
So not only does it blandify, but it just actively lies to you, which is a bit of a problem.
Right. I've had that experience.
So you do need to know more than it in order to know whether it's right or not, which should encourage students to kind of go and read more, you see. So you should ask AI about hemp and see what it says.
Oh, I've had lots of conversations with my chat buddy.
Great. That's good.
So when I schedule my hemp tour of the UK, I'll bring my boxes of notebooks and I'll drop them off at that library over there in Oxford.
Absolutely.
And we'll trade.
Absolutely. They'll love it. They'll love it. Let's hope they're not listening.
No, let's hope they are, because we need a greater audience. So
we do.
Professor Lynda Mugglestone, thank you so much. It has been just a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Okay, so what did we learn? We learned that hemp, as a word, has history on its side. That for most of its long life in English, hemp meant the fiber plant grown for ropes and sails and homespun fabrics and for profit. That meaning was stable for centuries, a household word, part of daily life, tied to farming and industry. But we also learned that language doesn't sit still. Over time, new uses crept in, first medicinal, then psychoactive, and now commercial forces are pulling hemp in even more directions. And while lawmakers try to impose definitions and industries fight for market share, ordinary people just keep using the word however they want. That's how language works. That's what Professor Mugglestone is reminding us here. So am I chasing windmills? Yeah, maybe. But as she said, this meaning is still there. The fiber, the grain, the plant with history behind it. It hasn't gone away. It's just been joined by other meanings. And maybe my job is simply to keep pointing back to that original thread to make sure we don't lose sight of what hemp has always been. All right. Anyway, that's the show today. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you learned something. Thank you to Professor Mugglestone for joining me here. And I hope to talk to her again, because here's the thing. She told me that she grew up in a farm in northern England, and I didn't ask her about that. So I think we've got reason to bring her back on the show again. So anyway, my name is Eric Herlock. I'm the senior digital editor here at Lancaster Farming Newspaper, the greatest agricultural newspaper in the world. Check us out online at lancasterfarming.com. Be sure to go to the show page for this episode where you can click on the links for our sponsors. You can register for the Global Fiber Summit in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I've got links to Professor Mugglestone's books. So go buy her books. Your library needs them. All right. Anyway, until next time, I'll see you in the newspaper. This episode of The Hemp Show is copyright 2025 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, part of the Steinman Communications family. Today's show was written and recorded by me, Eric Herlock, and mixed and engineered and mastered by Justin Berger.